I'm Tony Ruiz of Gold Derby, here with Michael Cliett, the visual effects supervisor for FX's Shōgun. And Michael, I think when people think of this show, they're going to think of like the big scenes, the big sprawling set pieces. But there was so much more to the visual effects of this show, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was. I mean, our mandate early on was to be invisible and seamless, as much as possible, because we wanted our viewers to be fully immersed in the world. And we wanted everybody to forget that, the show was shot in British Columbia. The whole thing was done in British Columbia, Canada. So visual effects were naturally going to be a big part of building out the world of Sengoku era Japan. And that had to be done on a finite level to a degree as well, and not just the big grand obvious set extensions that were going to be done of the world, but also on a finite level. And also it all had to be in service of the story. Like, for example, we had in episode 5, we've got this big earthquake that happens and the army gets buried, but in episode 4 they're doing all this cannon training. And so, but we shot episode 4 in a field that had no mountains, and that had to be the same field that they made the camp in episode 5 that then got buried by the landslide. So it had to be surrounded by mountains. So in episode 4, we did over 100 shots of just mountains, just surrounding all that field with mountains to set up the story in episode 5. And we did we did numerous scenes like that, where it's just in the background. You'd never know it while watching the show that visual effects are there, but there's a number of, not many exterior shots on this show were untouched by the visual effects department.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe I read that the post-production on this was like 18 months long.
Yeah, we had about a year and a half of post. That's correct. Now we certainly didn't get a year and a half on the visual effects end. We typically spent about 4 months or so on an episode, some a little bit longer, some a little bit shorter. But because we were doing a lot of edit locks, we spent a lot of time with our editors in the edit bay, trying to really finesse these edits. So there was a lot of that. But we really didn't have that much time to finagle with the visual effects outside of the schedule that we had already preconceived. Yeah. But it was a long drawn out process. Yes.
Well, in that process, for people that maybe just don't understand how visual effects work, is it harder to create like the big set pieces, like the earthquake, like the cannon fight, those types of pieces, or is it actually more difficult to do like the smaller moments, like the filming on what's supposed to be like an ocean cliff, which if you just look on YouTube, that there wasn't necessarily an ocean there.
Yeah, there wasn't an ocean, there wasn't a cliff there. So I'd like to say we have an ocean cliff scene that we filmed at 3 different locations, none of which were anywhere near an actual cliff or ocean. But that's a good question. I think it depends on the sequence and the intricacies and the detail. There's a lot of things that happen in visual effects that we're used to seeing like every day. And so in our human consciousness, it's so ingrained into our memory that it's very obvious to see if something, or to pick on, but if something isn't quite right that we're seeing on screen. Case in point, like animated humans, if people aren't moving right, necessarily to what we're used to seeing every day, then we're gonna see it obvious for what it is, a bad visual effect if for CG humans. That's why it's so crucial to get that right. And there's a multitude of CG humans here, but it goes on and on into, like, even in the violence of the show, just the intricacies and the attention to detail that we did so that the violence would be as accurate, or I shouldn't say accurate, just as real as possible. Like, I didn't want anything to come out and stick out as like, oh, that doesn't look, that's over the top, that's too over the top. And like the whole chain shot cannon sequence at the end of episode 4, where Joes and his men get shredded by chain shot, as violent and as horrific as that was, I don't think it wasn't over the top. Like that is actually what would have happened. And we ran a lot of simulations on, through various 3D programs to see like what would happen if you fired two cannonballs tethered together with a meter of chain, almost at the speed of sound through a group of humans. And that's actually what would happen. And I've heard from a lot of people that that who watched that sequence, and it never like struck out. It never jumped out to them that, oh wow, look at that, that's the visual effects team doing it. It was just part of the story, and as like I should say, like as violent and as shocking as that was, and obviously if you really think about the production of it, yes, it had to be visual effects, but at the same time, it didn't take you out of the story. Like I've heard from a lot of people that it just didn't take them, like you're staying within the story, if that makes sense. And that was, again, that was always our goal. We just wanted the viewer to be fully immersed in the story and the world, because if visual effects aren't in service of the story, then why are we doing it? Like it always has to be in service of the story. So, just going back to your question, I think, I know we were getting sidetracked a little bit there, but I think it has to be based more on the scene. I mean, you've got these huge set extensions and huge set pieces, and then a lot of, like I mentioned, finite detail. I think sometimes it's the finite detail that can be more difficult, because those are the things we don't want anybody to see or real. Like we did a lot of little wig fixes where the glue would be coming undone. I mean, there's probably close to 1,000 shots of just that in this series. But I don't think you ever see it. But that can be really difficult to kind of get right. Just to, even like fixed hairlines and stuff like that, because as good as an amazing, the hair and makeup team did an incredible job. I mean, they had so many actors to deal with on a daily basis, but you're on set for many hours under hot lights and in different weather conditions, and things happen. The glue comes undone, the wigs get a little bit imperfect, and everybody really looked all perfect in that day and age. And we had to do a lot of fixing along those lines. And sometimes the littlest things are the most difficult, surprisingly.
Well, you mentioned the wig lines, which was one of those things I never even considered. There's a scene with the arrows that have fire on them,
Yeah.
and I was stunned to learn that they weren't even holding them. That was an effect.
We never even knocked mean actually mounting a real arrow in a bow. There was never a single arrow placed inside of a bow, a real arrow, I should say. There was never a real arrow placed inside of a bow anywhere in this show. And we did, hundreds of shots of people firing arrows in this show. Yeah, there was no real arrows, other than the ones that were like, maybe there were a few lodged in some trees here and there that were real. But yeah, all the arrows that were fired and flying, that was all CG. And there was very little real fire ever. We had the ambush scene in episode 3 that you're noting. We had some spot fires placed on some trunks of the trees, but none of the arrows were flaming, obviously, because the arrows weren't even real. A lot of the fires on the ground were added by visual effects. I would say our special effects team did what they could. They did a great job, but special effects was amazing on the show for us. They really supported the visual effects team in so many ways. And they were just wonderful creative partners to work with as well. And so they did do spot fires here and there, but I would say 80 to 90% of the fire in that sequence is visual effects.
Well, I'm curious in that, you get the scripts and you're planning things out. How much planning goes into the actual shooting to make those actual effects happen? I mean, there must be a huge amount of preparation.
It is a lot of planning. I mean, it's a lot of planning, and especially at the beginning. When we first started the show, we did 9 months of planning up until rolling the first, doing the first shot. So we did 9 months of prep, and a lot of that was planning. A lot of that was figuring out where we were going to shoot things, and that was going to carry on into other episodes as well, like our major locations, like Osaka and Ajiro, and Edo. Like the locations were figured out in that time throughout the series. But yeah, there's an immense a ton of planning goes into what we're going to shoot versus what's going to be a visual effect. And that helps, that just helps with budgets early on as well. And then another part of the planning process is also like how much goes into how much you bring in the vendors on that side as well, and planning it with them. So once we figure out we're going to shoot it this way, what can we do in post to do it and so sometimes they've got good input too, as far as like that helps us decide maybe more or less what we need to shoot as well. So yeah, there's always a good amount of planning that goes into. We don't just go out and show up on the day and shoot it. It's always well thought out ahead of time, usually months in advance.
In doing visual effects for a show like this, how important is research?
Research is everything. I think again, like we decided early on that this show it's really easy to just go out and produce television based on a script or a story. I shouldn't say easy, but easier. And so while the research we did, could be confining, it also freed us because it dictated the direction we needed to go a lot of the times. And we wanted to ensure that this was the most accurate depiction of feudal Japan that potentially has ever been on screen, at least on this scale, to show this world doesn't exist anymore, right? And so we wanted to get every little detail as accurate as possible. And so we enlisted numerous advisors that were very, experts in their various areas. We had a master of samurai movements, a master of gestures, a master of serving tea, all kinds of these, many experts in their various areas, and all the gestures, all the movements, the way Japanese moved, especially in that period, the way they spoke, it all had meaning. There was always meaning behind it, behind the way that they moved. If you moved in the wrong way, it could represent something completely different and offend people, or make you appear weak. Or if you were improper, you were shamed. Like if you placed your blade the wrong way in a stand, if you placed your katana in the wrong way in the stand while placing it down, you were shamed. And it was all kinds of interesting little details like that. So it was important that we got all of that right with the cast, but it was also important that it was the world that we built was also incredibly authentic and accurate. And so we had one gentleman by the name of Frederick Krinz, who's a professor of Sengoku era Japan studies at Kyoto University in Kyoto, Japan. And he's thought of pretty much the world over as the world authority on this period in Japanese history. And he was a tremendous help, with all things like this. There's a lot of information on this time period. A lot of information on the internet, a lot is available to us, but a lot of it is not accurate. A lot of it is not necessarily, just not accurate. It's the best way to describe it. So he helped us really weed through a lot of that. We had to build Osaka Castle to spec. We built a version of Osaka Castle that it was closed and again, like 95% of Osaka Castle was all visual effect, but we built a version of that was standing, the one that was in 1597, which was 3 years before our story. And we had to go through tons of information just to find the information for our ships. The ships had to be of period. And then Edo, the under construction city of Edo, had to be of period. And by the time we were shooting, by the way, this is worth noting, by the time we in our 9 months of prep leading up to shooting, we had put together a 900-page research Bible based on this that pretty much has any kind of piece of information you would ever want to know about this period in Japan. So my showrunner Justin likes to say, if anybody else wants to ever make a show about feudal Japan, all we have to do is we can hand them this book and it's going to save them 9 months. So there was just a great deal of research. And by the way, it was our goal to really that we'd hope the Japanese people would watch this show and really appreciate it. And that our cast would appreciate our Japanese cast, that we got it right, because they, just by the attachment that we had with our cast and the emotional attachment they had by the lengths we were going to get it accurate, to get the culture, the traditions accurate, that made us that much more motivated to get it right, because we loved our cast, we loved our advisors. But then the show actually, from what I understand, has done really well in Japan, which is great. That's all we wanted. Like Japanese people are watching this show and they like the show, and that's fantastic. That speaks volumes, because typically Japanese the show were shows about Japanese history produced by Hollywood typically don't really do well in Japan, because there is a lot of glossing over of there tends to be a lot of glossing over of the accuracies of various facets. So we're really happy and honored and grateful that it's done so well in Japan. And then the historians that we enlisted, like Frederick Krenz, have really been taken aback by the beauty and the accuracy and the authenticity of the show. So that's what we wanted. And we're really, really grateful for the reception that it's gotten there.
Was there a sequence or a moment where you weren't sure how you were going to pull it off, and then when you finally saw the final product, you were like, "Yeah, we nailed this"?
Well, there were quite a few sequences like that. I think it's easy for me to identify multiple. Like the earthquake was one of the sequences. The boats, the ship race coming out of Osaka Harbor in episode 3. The cliff sequence in episode 1 that we briefly touched on. I mean, those were all sequences we shot. We all shot pieces. We shot pieces of those sequences, practical pieces of those sequences. But it wasn't until we actually got into post that we really started working with some previs and some post-viz and massaging the edit here and there, that we actually figured out how those sequences were going to play. And then what visual effects pieces specifically we would need to fill all the gaps. And so, I mean, the biggest sequence would have been the ship race out of Osaka. When we finished shooting, I went down to LA and spent 3 months down there with our post team and our editors, and through working with them and the good folks, our vendor, Important Looking Pirates in Stockholm, Sweden. We did tons, and we probably did about 150 various shots of CG ships, just gray shaded CG ships, post viz, to fill the holes in the edits. Took shots from the beginning of the sequence, put them at the back, and vice versa. We just, constantly moving things around, watching different birds. We probably did, I don't know, 50 to 60 iterations of that edit, maybe more. Really trying to figure out not just the way that the visual effects were going to play, but how the story was going to be told. And we really shaped that story in the edit in post, and visual effects had a big part in that, in shaping the story. So yeah, there was some of that. There was definitely a lot of that, where we didn't really know how exactly we were going to do it. But all 3 of those sequences, the cliff, the ship race out of Osaka, the earthquake, despite not exactly knowing how we were going to do it early on, I think they all came out quite nice. I'm pretty proud of all those sequences. So.
As well you should be. Michael, thank you so much. Everybody go to goldderby.com, make your predictions for the upcoming award season. Stay tuned for interviews with more contenders in the coming weeks. Michael Cliett, congratulations. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Tony.